So if we could find our way back to our seats, the first panel of the day here after lunch is how can we best develop state, district, and local school administrators to lead in accelerating the transition to digital learning. So we have here on the panel a number of very, very intelligent and seasoned veterans in this leadership world of school administration. And what I thought I'd do is give a couple brief thoughts, and then I'm going to ask each of the panelists themselves to introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of break into the questions. I think, you know, as I've gone across my experiences over the past 13 years now of working in the state of Maine and trying to support that one-to-one effort, which, as many of you know, is a massive change effort. Something that wasn't done on a school basis, it wasn't done at a district basis, it was done at a state level. And so when we began in 2002, we were trying to implement one-to-one learning in 236 middle schools spread across a geography the size of South Korea. So it was no simple task. And when we started that, I think there were two really key elements that we were recognizing needed to be done in that effort. And I think we've talked about them a little bit today. One of them was to always remember that it was about the learning. It wasn't about the technology. And that was a mantra that we would say at every meeting that we met with, whether it was the press, whether it was families, whether it was school members, teachers, students. It was always to remind them it's about learning and not about the technology. And secondary to that, or not secondary, but the other one, and we talked about this a lot when we met then with the teachers and the administrators and the tech directors and all of those folks, was to remind them that if this was going to happen, it was going to be because of leadership, and the next thing was going to be leadership, and the third most important thing was leadership. That we realized even back then, if we didn't have the leaders from school leaders at the system level, the building level, the classroom level, it wasn't going to fly. Fortunately, they're 13 years in, 3 governors, 6 legislatures later, 3 different commissioners of ed, or 4, there's 5 commissioners of ed over that period of time. They're still going. So there's some sense of sustainability, and I think those two topics have always been the core topics that have been the lifeblood of keeping that going. And then the work was always about professional development. People would always ask me, you know, you must spend a lot of time on all that technology. And I'd say, you know what, the technology's easy, you know, relatively speaking, and particularly because we said, well, we'll just get Apple to do it, right? That's why we hired them. And they did a great job because it's easy to move 80,000 boxes around. But the teachers and supporting them, that has always been the big challenge. So today we want to talk a little bit more about the leadership side of things. We've talked a lot about the teachers themselves this morning and the pre-service programs, teacher programs. Now we want to talk a little bit about the leaders that we know are necessary to provide that support and leadership to their peers and their teachers. So if we could start with Dr. Edwards, if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit about who you are and what you've done and where you've been, and we'll work down the table.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Common Sense and Sunnylands and the Lead Commission for your leadership across the entire country. And I'll also give a plug to Common Sense. We have used Common Sense in terms of our digital citizenship work that's integrated fully into our curriculum and is a vital part of any type of one-to-one initiative. I think it's been particularly helpful to us. I serve as superintendent of the Mooresville Graded School District in Mooresville, North Carolina, small district with 6,000 students. We have had what we call our digital conversion. All students 2nd through 12th grade have their own laptop computer. 4th through 12th graders take them home 24/7, and we're in our 6th year of that, and we've had a lot of success. I was kind of reminiscing through this morning. I served as superintendent in Henrico County, Virginia for 10 years. And back in 2000, we deployed 26,000 laptops. And in Mooresville, I like to say, well, we're on the cutting edge. Back in Henrico, we were on the bleeding edge. But I think through that process, the continuous learning has been exciting. And I'll have to reflect. I think I've learned more from our students in the last 2 years and more from our teachers in the last 2 years than all the experience that I've had put together. And I think the heart of learning about leadership comes from students, and the heart of learning about leadership comes from teachers. And so I've been blessed to work with a lot of great students and a lot of great teachers.
I'm Rosanne Javorsky, Assistant Executive Director of the Allegheny Intermediate Unit. Pennsylvania has 29 intermediate units. For some of you, you may know them as regional education service agencies, county school systems, or BOCES. I work with 42 school districts surrounding the city of Pittsburgh. We have small districts where there are 600 students, K to 12, and our largest has about 8,000 students, K to 12. We like to say we can't make anybody do anything because we are what we call a local control state, but what we do is work with a number of our leaders to make sure that things happen. So we can talk a little more about that as the panel evolves.
Good afternoon, Josh Starr, Superintendent of Schools, Montgomery County. Anybody here a Montgomery County parent? All right, yeah. I figured usually it's the case. So I'm in my 4th year as superintendent in Montgomery. I got to be careful what I say. That's right. Line up later. You can just, yeah. I've been superintendent in Montgomery. I'm in my 4th year. Montgomery County is 154,000 kids in 202 schools. We're growing by about 2,500, 2,800 kids a year. Very, very diverse district of 35% free and reduced price meals, about 16% English language learners, about 22% black, 15% Asian, 27% Latino, 6% multi-ethnic, the rest white, around 500 square miles. We'll talk more about the technology piece. I just want to take an issue with actually the way you framed the initial part of the conversation, Jeff. It's not about teachers or leaders. We have to think of the teachers as the leaders in order to really move this forward today. So rather than thinking, we talked about teachers in the morning, I wasn't here, but leaders now, we must think of our teachers as the leaders in order to get this right.
Good afternoon. I'm Johnny Veselka. I'm Executive Director of the Texas Association of School Administrators in Austin, Texas. We have a great statewide partnership with Common Sense Media in the state. We have about 2,500 members. Almost 1,000 of those are superintendents of schools, more than 1,000 districts in the state. And about 8 years ago, we embarked on an effort to transform our educational programs across the state. We created a document creating a new vision for public education in Texas. That's been the foundation for everything that we've done since that time. Some major initiatives that are currently underway across the state, and I look forward to talking about those as we go through the afternoon.
Terrific. So as we get into this topic, I think where I wanted to start a little bit was just looking at kind of the formal program of developing our school administrators. So when we talk about the formal programs, those times similar to this morning's conversation about pre-service teachers, there's coursework and degree work and licensing work that needs to be done in, I think, every state in order to become a certified principal or certified superintendent. And the degree to which, and I think we'll have some sense of disagreement, which I think is great, but the degree to which we feel like the formal programs that we have had contact with and are aware of, does that program, the course of study, the internships that may be involved, any of those processes, do they actually get at leadership development versus preparation of school administrators, which in many people's minds is a wholly different job. There's this notion of management versus leading and moving forward. So if I open it up to the whole panel, if we want to start on one end and work down, or if you guys want to just jump in. There we go, jump in, go for it. Oh,
I'm with these illustrious superintendents and I'm jumping in, but I think I said in the past I would agree that we were doing a better job of developing administrators as opposed to leaders. We have many principal preparation programs in our region and superintendent letter of eligibility programs. And what I've seen is there has been a huge shift in the last, I will say, 5 to 7 years, where it's no longer about management of a building or district, but it is about that leadership and how you become a strategic, visionary leader. And I think that was by design, but quite necessary. We have a lot of people who can deal with what we used to call the 3 Bs, budgets, boards, and band parents. But it's that other piece of it that we really need to focus on, and how do you move forward? And I think we can take it to this level about digital technology, but it's really how do you move forward in teaching and learning, and that's really what it's about. There are still programs that I would say I can tell the path that people took, because we do have some preparation programs that I call the path of least resistance. So I know if you go to a certain college, it's because you want to take your 15 credits, do a brief internship, and then you're certified. But by far, the majority of programs, I think, have really evolved to include those necessary leadership skills.
I'll jump in and share. In Henrico, we partnered with Virginia Commonwealth University and built out some master's and doctoral programs and partnered, but still it was driven from the university. Now, when I came to Mooresville, I knew that leadership development would be central to success of our digital conversion. So we shopped around and went to several different universities and made a proposal that we would develop our program. We would put their certification with it, and then we would help develop the content. So we did that with 2 different universities, and we've run a series of master's cohorts for leadership, and we've had a vital part, not just in developing the content, the curriculum, but we aligned it directly to our needs. And we also did the same thing with our second doctoral cohort in the same design. Then we also did a cohort related to instructional technology master's program. And I think that we informed the university about some missing links. We were able to use and to develop some of their systems in this area, but I do think that particularly in the area of digital leadership, that is something that in terms of universities and their affiliation, their experience, and what they bring to the table, that partnering is the way to go. Not contracting with the university, but really building the work together and evolving the leadership practice. I think that a principal in Mooresville today works entirely different than they did 7 or 8 years ago. Their work is different. Their work is building other leaders. To Josh's point, the most significant part of leadership is building a leadership culture. And lots of times it's still a hierarchical model or a linear model, and our model is more in fractals and leaders all over the place. And I think that model makes a lot of sense. But I do think that an organic model that's aligned to the immediate needs is a process that works much better than a lot of the traditional programming.
So when I speak to my mentor, Bob Peterkin, who ran the graduate program I went to, I tell him, you didn't teach me anything about health insurance or real estate management. And there's 2 things that I have to deal with constantly in order to make sure that we're running efficiently. So we've made a shift in Montgomery County. We really, frankly, don't rely on external programs at all, other than for certification purposes. We have invested a significant amount of resources into leadership development. So in order to become a principal, you have to go through multiple levels. So you're called what's an AP1, then an AP2, then a principal intern. The intern actually is next to the principal the entire year and then takes over the building for 2 months while the real principal is out of the building. It's a very complex system, so they really get that experience. I'm the first superintendent to actually sit on what's called the principal development team of a current principal intern, where we go in it's about every quarter or so, maybe every 2 months, where we review the principal interns' problem of practice, their technical work, all the stuff they're doing in the school, and we give them a lot of in-depth feedback. So by the time they get to me, when they're actually interviewing for the job, we've weeded out a whole bunch of people. The shift we're making a twofold shift. One is the prior sort of orientation of the district was purely on outcomes, and we're focusing on outcomes as well as practice. And it's an interesting shift for folks because they're to organize around the change in daily practice is different than organizing around just get me different outcomes. Let's really talk more at length about that, but it's a cultural shift, and we've had to change some of the curriculum as well. We've also started a central office leadership program because we've never had that, and we're trying to invest much more heavily in teacher leadership. So we have a new career lattice program where we're rewarding teachers for taking on additional work. And our belief is that that's going to be the pipeline then to the administrative one. And as I said earlier, we're trying to reframe the idea of what does a leader mean, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a certified administrator or someone who has the administrative position. The principal's job is to make sure that there's leadership amongst all levels, and we measure that, and we hold people accountable for that. So we're trying to touch it in a bunch of different ways, but we take the full responsibility for leadership development. We don't leave it to the universities.
As I mentioned, the focus of our work on transforming schools throughout the state of Texas as a professional association, we focus on several key areas with our work. Digital integration is at the heart of that. Creating a deeper, richer curriculum through higher priority learning standards, and we're beginning to do some work with our State Board of Education in that regard, focusing on other ways of assessing student performance, moving away from this high-stakes standardized testing environment that we're in, and really creating more of a community-based community involvement in accountability systems. And with that, much of our work is focused on superintendents and principals who are already in the profession, working with them to develop their leadership skills, to create a mentoring program. We have a strong mentoring program for beginning superintendents, and much of that work is around transformational leadership. We are partnering with several of the universities in the state to transform their educational preparation programs, and those are moving forward. We have over 50 programs in the state that are training, preparing leaders, principal or superintendent certification programs, either university or alternative certification. So we have a number to cover, but we have a few that are beginning to emerge as real leaders in that effort.
So it does sound, just to a degree, that from a literal technical perspective, it is possible. Like Rosanne, you even mentioned that you've seen candidates who have come through who simply wanted that path of least resistance, that you can actually get through the system, the formal system, and avoid some of these what sound like much more robust development programs, unless, of course, you don't want to work in your district or your district. So is there something that we should be changing at the system level then, so that you can't essentially fall through the cracks or find that path of least resistance? Because how many of you want those folks coming into your districts and then having to start all over again, right? Or I'm imagining that probably when you're doing your hiring, you're looking, and just as you were looking at these things, you're saying, oh, that person took the path of least resistance. They're not a candidate I'm interested in, right? And is this something that you think is possible that we can be looking at nationally, or it's going to end up, we know it's going to end up being a state by state by state. But it sounds like, am I correct, though, that each of your states, there is that path of least resistance, there is a way, it's just maybe not ideal?
I'll jump in. I think that I like the dean this morning who said, oh, you got the question wrong.
Yeah.
That's always fun to say. But I think that the supposition that whether it's a teacher, whether it's a custodian, or whether it's a superintendent or principal, that they're going to come to the job ready to go is a wrong assumption. And that as soon as they enter into a district, or they enter into the Mooresville district, there's a sense of, okay, we are about their development and their growth. Now, whether they came from a traditional leadership program or a hybrid that we've developed, but a sense of nurturance for leadership. And one of the things that we've done in Mooresville, we have a teacher leadership program. We're in our 7th year, and we've developed lots of teacher leaders. And when we hear the question, like, what's the secret to success? Well, the secret is a lot of leaders in a lot of places doing a lot of leadership things. They're influencing others, they're contributing to the growth of colleagues, and they're being reflective about their own growth. So I think that, the idea should be that whenever we hire somebody, that we develop and we invest and we support and we nurture their growth and development. And I think that works. And I think that strong school systems and effective superintendents understand that leadership development, it should be a central part of the work, not just from hierarchical leaders, principals or assistant principals, central office, but leaders in the classroom. And I know I was at a conference and mentioned a custodian who is a remarkable leader for us. He's just, everything he does just speaks of leadership. And somebody said, well, a person in that role can't be a leader. And I said, well, how wrong? That person is a remarkable leader that influences students, teachers, and everybody with the quality of the work. So pervasive leadership inculcated, I think, is a pathway that makes a lot of sense.
And I think to go along with that, I think it becomes clear who went to a quality program and who did not fairly early on. And I think what happens is you do need to meet people where they are and to kind of mentor, support, and in some cases, I'll be very honest, counsel into new positions. I mean, so I think that, and sometimes those people aren't necessarily getting hired either. You can be certified for the job and not necessarily get a position. I think the other thing that has happened is there's a cyclical review of programs for credentialing. And so I suspect that some of these programs that are less than stellar, when their credentialing is up, they would not be recertified to provide that program unless they made significant changes.
So I guess the only thing I would add is that I think about it much more in terms of the supervision of folks and who are the principal managers, and who are the how are the principals supervising the assistant principals, and it's, you know, we're in this frame in the country now around evaluation. It's all about evaluation based on you know, the way federal policy is going, based on really bad science and just inappropriate ways of evaluating teachers, and it extends to principals for shaming and blaming and misguided attempts at accountability. That was my soapbox moment. I will get off it now. And what we're trying to make the shift is to coaching. You know, we have a consulting principal, just like we have consulting teachers, through our professional growth system for every new principal. Even if you're from outside the district and you have years of experience, you're assigned a consulting principal to work with you just in your development. But we've also trained all our principal managers on coaching. And the expectation is that they're coaches. They're not, I mean, they're also evaluators, of course. You have to do both. But the evaluation should not be a surprise at the end. So it should be part of a running conversation you're having with the person who's, you know, working with you throughout the year. So part of the stance is not just about who's coming in, their level of preparation, but how are we prepared to support them along the way? What kinds of holistic data are we using? We're putting in multiple kinds of data sets to really look at multiple aspects of leadership. But then are we doing our part? Because if I don't have good principal managers to actually support people, then it doesn't matter what program they went to. They might be in a situation where they're going to fail, and that's not acceptable, because we can help them before we have to get to that conversation about, you know, you want to consider another career option.
I'll pass.
So I guess the thing that's rattling around in my mind is, you know, Texas obviously is big. Everything's big in Texas, including Texas itself. You know, probably more kids in Houston than there are in the entire state of Maine, I bet. And each of your districts probably are quite sizable. I'll bet your district in Maryland is maybe bigger than the state of Maine as well. And so in where I live and in many other small rural states, average size district, 700 kids. It's the average. You know, the overwhelming majority of my middle schools in the state of Maine, fewer than 200 kids, right? And then that's the one middle school in the entire district. So the challenge then becomes one of how do we help those kinds of districts produce the kinds of programs that it sounds like you've been able to do, and what would your recommendations be then in so much of America, which is rural America? So I don't think it's just Maine. I'm sure North Dakota and parts of you know, North Carolina, very small rural towns that have a superintendent overseeing a district that might have an elementary, a middle, and a high, or an elementary and a middle high school together, and they don't necessarily have that capacity around them. We don't have intermediate units as many states do. So what are your thoughts in knowing what works? How might the rest of America try and implement those types of systems?
Could share a couple of things. When I published a book a year and a half ago called Every Child, Every Day, and in that research I found out that 80% of the districts in the United States are less than 6,000 students. So I think, for one thing, I think there's an inordinate amount of attention to very, very large urban districts, although obviously they serve a lot of students. But there are several organizations. Keith Kruger was here from COSN, and Terry Greer from Houston and I are chairing an advisory committee with COSN. Also, AASA does some great work along with the state organizations to help support leadership in rural and small districts. And then also the League of Innovative Schools, I'm involved with that group. There's a lot of outreach going on with districts. But I would also say that I think that if there's a good collegial network within a region or within a state, I know I was up was sharing with Rosanne, working with some intermediate units in Pennsylvania. And when there's a good collegial network, there's a lot of sharing and caring. And I think that in a culture of leadership, superintendents should be sharing and should be working together. And I'll give Terry Greer, superintendent of Houston, he's contracting with Mooresville. We do their PD. And we send teachers to Houston, and they send teachers to us. We're working with Baltimore County, and Baltimore County has sent down teachers, and this summer had a lot of teachers. So we're sharing together, and every time we've had hundreds of districts visit Mooresville, but every time we have a visitor, we learn from those visitors. So I think there's this sense of collegial growing together, and that we should really inculcate that and work on that, then it can meet those points of need.
And I would say we have a school district, the Elizabeth Forward School District, who it comes close as we can to being rural within Allegheny County. And Elizabeth Forward was probably the first school district in Pennsylvania that was accepted into the League of Innovative Schools. But much like you have talked about the sharing that happens there, they open their doors wide to everybody. They go out, they seek help from others, they let others come in to their buildings. And a lot of what is happening there, the story has been told in many national publications about the Elizabeth Forward School District. It happens because of the leadership of Dr. Bart Rocco and Dr. Todd Karushkin, who have this wonderful way of going out, and somebody mentioned earlier, we have to get better about telling our stories. But they are two examples of the innovation that can happen when you have that leadership in place. So I guess just really being willing to go out and get what you need and to tell your story is part of it.
Just to add to Mark's comment about the collegiality and the ability of school leaders to work together, what I think we've seen in our state over the past 6 or 8 years is a deepening conversation about learning and about school transformation and all the topics that we're talking about here among our members. And we do have some very large and very fast-growing school districts in Texas, but we also have over 500 school districts that have less than 1,000 students. And so to bring the leaders in those districts together, to create regional consortia, to create opportunities for them to share, to come to conferences and sit at the table and share ideas has really been very productive. And we think, I see a much deeper conversation around student learning and the digital integration in the classroom, and better ways of assessing student performance and all of those topics than I've seen in the past. And I just see that continuing to grow and continuing to build those relationships across school district lines.
So the only thing I would add perhaps is thinking about the sort of problem of a smaller rural place. I guess for me the question becomes how you're defining leadership, and what's the culture around it in the school district. And if it's seen in the sort of very traditional way, you know, then you're probably not going to be identifying folks who have enormous leadership potential or interest. I've been in many places where a teacher wants to be is kind of shy about saying that they actually want to go into a leadership position because they don't want to separate themselves from the pack. Or there's a culture around succession planning. I mean, I was able to do something this year in Montgomery County I've never been able to do in my life, where I've named my chief operating officer to take over, a year early, right? And my next chief of staff, because the culture in the district is such we're allowed to do that. Other places you can't do it until the end, and you have to post it, and it becomes this hidden process. I'm actually able to do it a year in advance because of the kind of culture we've created around that. So the first question becomes to the superintendent, the school board, and the committee: what does leadership mean? I mean, it just never ceases to amaze me how many amazing leaders there are of so many different ranks, whether it's a building service manager, custodian, or whether teachers operating in ways, but we always think of it in the very classic, tall white male who's been experienced for a while as the leader. And then if we only think about it like that, I think some of those areas that are smaller are gonna struggle with it unless they expand their definitions.
Sure. So if we put a little bit more definition on it, then a question would be, in a digital age, what do we need to be doing in addition to, or is everything you're already doing, you think, fully supporting this notion of how do these leaders help the transition and lead the transition into a digital learning environment, one where, and I found that it isn't always necessarily the small rurals. In fact, the small rurals sometimes are the ones who are more than ready to embrace than are those communities where you have, like in Maine, what we kind of refer to as the Gold Coast, right, who most of the parents went to higher ed institutions for their own degree work, and they knew what school looked like to them, and that's what they're looking for their kids too. But how do we then develop those leaders, and what is it that specifically we need to be doing to make sure that the new leaders are ready to lead this transition?
If I can, I mean, I'll start on that. So we're rolling out our new technology now. You know, we're Chromebooks as well as bring your own devices, and we're finding that there's a direct correlation between schools that have very high engagement scores on, because we do the Gallup Q12 teacher engagement survey, and their ability to integrate the devices into technology. Because the schools where the teachers are highly engaged and they're collaborative in nature and the leader understands that they are, the best thing they can do is to engage their staff and to let the teachers lead and the students as well. I think someone said that earlier. Those are the ones that are doing the best, because this is, you know, you have to embrace a high level of ambiguity to be a successful leader, and it's just not straightforward. So that those schools where there's high levels of engagement, where the principal understands that it's the teachers that have to do the work and the support professionals as well, the more they engage them, the better, the more success we're having.
As I mentioned earlier, we started this process in our state with 35 superintendents in 2006 and began this journey. And over the last several years, recognizing that many of those superintendents have retired or moved on, and that number is dwindling, we have brought some of our younger superintendents in and created another cohort of leaders that we see as our next generation of superintendent leaders going forward and continuing this work. The other thing that we have done over the last couple of years is we've looked at all of the work that we've done in the state and thought about how we might be able to, as a Superintendent's Association, provide instructional support to help our teachers and to identify our teacher leaders across the state. We have, among our partnerships in Texas, we have a great partnership with Apple, and we created a TASA on iTunes U site about 18 months ago, and we invited teachers to come in and work with us to identify resources for high school courses. And these are not designed as courses for students, but as resource collections for teachers that are tied to the Texas standards. And we started with 18 courses in English language arts, math, science, and social studies. And of course, being on iTunes U, they're accessible not only to all of our teachers in the state, but anyone that has access and wants and may want to utilize some of those resources. But over the past year or so, we have continued to increase that content to where we now have 41 courses and resources identified for those subjects. We just partnered with Southern Region Education Board to align their math and literacy content to Texas standards, given the fact that we only talk about Common Core when we're outside the boundaries of the state of Texas. And we needed to bring that into alignment so that our teachers would be comfortable using those resources. So we've continued to make a major commitment to working with teachers, to involving teachers in our leadership programs, and just continuing to spread that message about transformational change.
I think that, again, learning from students and teachers and parents in the community, one of the aspects, particularly when we talk about ecosystems or culture, I believe that in a digital environment, there's a requisite need to push leadership out. And in fact, there's a book coming out in February called Thank You for Your Leadership. Michael Fullen wrote the foreword to it, and pay attention, it's going to be a great book. But anyway, I would share, I think that the idea of developing, acknowledging, inculcating, and pushing leadership from teachers all over the place. Now, we have a first-year teacher this year who has come in first year and is a thriving leader, influencing lots of others with, yes, sheer enthusiasm, but knowledge and know-how. I think it's important to understand that parents, you know, when we look at all the one-to-ones in the country and how few have really been successful, I think that part of that ecosystem requires reaching out and working with the business community. There was a mention about the Chamber of Commerce. Well, one of our first efforts was to get with Economic Development, Chamber of Commerce, and really work with them on this big picture, this big concept. I think it's real important. Governor Perdue is here. We worked several years ago in terms of saying how important the infrastructure was, but linking this type of work to a broader leadership network. And this is, I think, a place where we're really learning a lot. Students, the idea that a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 15-year-old is not a leader is ridiculous. So we have student leaders who are influencing teachers, influencing the culture of the classroom, and building this sense of a pervasive leadership environment. And I think that in the digital environment, if you're really going to access and use real-time information and data, if you don't authorize leadership at all points of the district, you're not really capturing the benefit of that resource. So I really like the idea of pushing leadership out, acknowledging it, developing it, inculcating it, and looking for it. And I think one of the most important jobs of a superintendent or a principal or anybody in a leadership role is acknowledging leadership and saying thank you. And I think when leadership is acknowledged, it grows. Failing to acknowledge leadership at any point suppresses that. So I think acknowledging it, lifting it up, and then when you see that happen, then these points of leadership all over the place illuminate the whole environment.
Terrific. So if I throw one more question at you, and then we'll see if the floor has any more questions. If they don't, then maybe I'll have one more question thereafter. But as we think about all of these programs that you have been able to put in place, how is it that you identify, or do they just seem to identify themselves? But what are you looking for as you're identifying, or how are you identifying leaders at every level, as you said, student leaders, teacher leaders, building leaders? You know, how is that working? Do you have a formal process for that? Is it something that people just seem to appear because they're natural-born leaders? But I know that everyone isn't a natural-born leader, and there are many people who have learned the trade, so to speak.
I think that evolutional capacity building is part of a cultural dynamic, and the idea that that things are evolving. We heard this earlier in 2 or 3 panels, that if you're not growing, something's wrong. So the idea is that individuals grow, and I'm very proud that I can reference several teachers that a few years ago, they were miserable in the digital environment. Now they're rock stars. They're thriving, but there was a lot of nurturance. And I think that nurturance is a really good term. I like it for, we think of typically young children or toddlers, but I think adults need nurturance. And I think veteran teachers need to be nurtured. Principals need to be nurtured. School boards need nurturance, sometimes directional nurturance, but need nurturance. But I think that in a strong culture where leadership is evolving, there's this sense of we're leading and growing together. And I always love, we have a summer conference. We always start off with students, and every summer, you know, we know they're going to impress people because they've done great work. But every year they come up with something that to me really imports the wisdom of youth. And I really think that when there's this sense of this new environment, that if we're learning together, we're growing together. But I think it's developmental. And certainly, you know, we've been lucky to have a lot of great principals and great teacher leaders. And Principal of the Year in North Carolina is our middle school principal, Dr. Carrie Tolbert. And a few years ago, our high school principal was the Principal of the Year in North Carolina. But we've got lots of leaders that are evolving. And we have several assistant principals right now that I know they're going to be superintendents just as sure as a few years ago when Dallas Dance was an assistant principal in Henrico County. We said, you were going to be a superintendent. So I think you set the stage, and you set the stage of expectation.
So I think sometimes, and this is particularly true when working with teachers, oftentimes other people recognize their leadership, but they don't necessarily recognize it. And I'll just give you just a small story, but we have a place called Transform Ed. And Transform Ed is a digital playground for teachers where we recognize that teachers need to come and learn about the newest and latest and greatest in technology in a non-threatening environment. And it's really a playful space. And we have a lot of different things in there. But one of the things that comes to mind, there was this excellent physics teacher in one of our districts who was a master at integrating technology. So we asked her to facilitate a session in Transform Ed. And she said, oh, I couldn't do that. She never saw herself as a person who could share her learning with her colleagues because she assumed everybody was doing that. And we knew not everybody was doing what she was doing. So part of it was really nurturing and supporting her to say, we'll do it with you, but to really give her the confidence to, number one, recognize not everybody's doing that, and you truly are a leader among other physics teachers at least. So I think part of it is that mentoring and support and helping them to recognize what they can do.
Yeah, so we have our formal programs, but I've made it the explicit expectation for my formal leaders to be identifying the next generation and mentoring them and encouraging them. One thing I try to do a lot, frankly, is talk to them about balance, because I'm amazed at how many, I have 3 young kids, well, they're not, 12, 11, and 6. I don't know if they're young anymore, but so I'm always talking about having a balance and setting limits, because a lot of folks are afraid of the time that it takes, to be an administrator. So I always try to get a lot of those stories out. We find a lot of our building leaders come from the staff development teacher ranks. It just is sort of a natural flow, right? They become the lead teacher or the staff development teacher in the school, and then they become an assistant principal or principal. We've also, again, implemented our new Career Lattice program, which rewards and incentivizes teachers in our highest need schools to take on additional responsibility. And part of the idea is that we want our best teachers then to become our best leaders. And I want to go back to Mark's point, because it's so important. The recognition is so important. It's one of the reasons, or one of the great benefits I found from tweeting, and yes, that is a shameless plug to try to increase my clout score by getting you all to follow me at MCPS Super, but I had to slip it in there somewhere. But I found as I go around to schools and then I tweet about something I've seen good pride, I take a picture and tweet, the pride that people then take, and it could be a teacher or it could be an assistant principal or a coach, the pride that they're like, wow, it was actually recognized that we were doing this cool thing. It could be an artifact. I found has been a really powerful way to promote leadership practices and help other people understand what I'm looking for leaders. I'm not just looking for the traditional, did you open up school on time? Is your traffic lane running okay? Et cetera, et cetera. But these are the kinds of practices I'm looking for as I travel around the district. That was MCPS Super.
We've got it. As a professional organization, most of our leaders, I think, emerge through our leadership development programs. We have a tremendous amount of interest in several of the offerings. We have a partnership with the Schlechte Center, whereby we offer an Academy for Transformational Leadership several times a year across the state. We have a series of academies that are provided annually by Island November around digital learning, and those are just a couple of our smaller academies. Our major statewide conferences also focus heavily on the topics that we're talking about here today, and I think much of the involvement, the emergence of new leaders in the state comes through work with colleagues and through our programs that we offer to beginning superintendents and others in the field, and we're always encouraging, and I think more and more today than ever, the encouragement of superintendents to bring their leadership teams to our leadership development programs.
So if we have a couple of moments, if there are any questions from the audience. Looks like we have at least one coming.
Hi, I'm Katie Shankin. I'm the president of Common Sense Media. I have spent much of my career in the private sector, and thank you. In the private sector, especially over the last decade, a lot of has been talked about in terms of emotional intelligence as a key ingredient of leadership. And I hadn't actually really connected it to what makes a great teacher until last night when I was talking to Sean, our National Teacher of the Year. And I asked him, I said, what's your view on what makes a great teacher? And that was what he led with. And I thought it was really interesting. And I wanted to ask you guys, to the extent that emotional intelligence can be taught or at least coached, what can and should we be doing in terms of professional development, in terms of teaching programs, and in terms of what school administrators can do?
So we, when I got to Montgomery County a few years back, you know, this has been a county that's been relentlessly and solely focused on academic excellence and academic results, and we've continued that and will. But I've added, we've added 2 elements to it. Don't worry for all you folks who are, yeah. Although we do need seats. So anyway. But we've added creative problem solving, and actually the other conference I'm at today is on the OECD test for schools, which we gave because we really think that helps measure it, and social emotional well-being. And you can go on our website and you can see our strategic planning framework where we really very clearly describe not only the competencies that kids should have, but what adults should do in support of academic excellence, creative problem solving, social emotional intelligence. And what we found is that we've gone through the last couple of years really raising awareness about it and training, or I should say exposing leaders to it. Because when I said very clearly to my folks, look, SEL development is not, you know, I'm not going to give you a red binder and say here's a curriculum, because every school does it differently, but you have to have great relationships with kids. You have to engage your adults. So that, again, that's why we use the Gallup surveys to see are adults able to engage, you know, or supervisors, whether you're in central office or at schools, able to engage your teachers and your support professionals and your kids and your parents in the work. And then we've been providing a number of resources to expose our leaders as well as our teachers to different SEL practices, and not saying there's only one way of doing it. We have a task force and we're refining it, but we've just, you know, purely by elevating it as saying it is as important as the academics. My line all the time is, again, I have 3 kids. I expect them to be straight A students. I'm losing that battle, by the way, but I expect them to be straight A students and great kids, great people. If I had to choose, and I'd rather not, but if I had to choose, I'd rather have them be great people and average students than average people and straight A students. And it's remarkable to me to see how that's resonated throughout the community, and I'm seeing now in schools, leaders are really taking that to heart and coming up with, again, with our support, with resources, ways that they can really develop relationships with people, and that's such a critical component of it.
You know, I think that the whole emotional intelligence, the ecosystem of care is vital, and I think that, you know, we hear the term efficacy. And I think it's a really powerful term, but I think the notion that just because somebody shows up in a classroom or a principal's office, that they understand the importance of the depth of efficacy. Our motto in Mooresville is every child, every day. And we say it all the time because we have not achieved a goal of every child, but we are working hard at it. And I really believe this. I think that when children feel loved and cared for, and the notion that that should be just in the elementary school, well, where the children need to be loved and cared for more than any place is probably in high school. But also the employees need to know that this is an environment where love is a central part of strong organizations. And I know when I was writing Every Child Every Day, some of my editors said, don't put that stuff in there about love. They'll think you're some kind of Southern evangelist, and that won't, it won't sell. And I asked my mother about it. She said, you put that in there right now. You know it's true, and so it's in there. But I do think that in strong schools, and there's a lot of research. Margaret Wheatley's done some great research around this. When you walk in the threshold, you feel love. And when children feel loved, when employees, there's a sense of care. And so I think that emotional intelligence is being attentive to the social emotional needs of everybody. And when that's part of the culture, I think that people realize that if it's not part of the culture, then there's damage, and you know, we had a student who was murdered a couple of years ago, and our teachers were smart enough to know we had to spend a lot of time talking about that. And in some places they said, well, no, we're not going to talk about it. We have to go forward. Well, you couldn't go forward until you dealt with it. So I think it's so important to understand that social emotional intelligence, it's not just something nice to do. It's vital to the ultimate success of a school or school district.
So if you could, I think I can sense the timer on my left here. If you could all join me in thanking these wonderful panelists.
And show them a little love. Thank you. Great panel, and now the next panel will transition up here.